Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rob and today we are going to be painting some Orks. 11th edition is coming, and this month's videos I am going to be painting some Orks because I suspect lots of people are going to be jumping on board 11th edition with this new box. And I am no different by doing this tutorial. Big thanks to Crusader Games for sending me this model, which was very kind of them. And looking forward to painting a few models in the new 11th edition box if I can get hold of it. There's a couple in there that I'm like, ooh, they are tickling my pickle. So quite excited about the drop of that. But let's get into what we are working on today. So, I've gone for a yellow scheme. I think it's Flash Gits. I think that's right. My knowledge of Ork lore is pretty poor. But we're going to use maize yellow as our base here. Now, I do recognise that some of you might have airbrushes, and we will be using the airbrush just a little bit. You don't necessarily need to use an airbrush to get this Ork the way that it kind of looks right now. But you could airbrush this yellow if you wanted to. But I find personally it's fine just hand painting it. Next up, we're going to actually gloss varnish those panels where we are going to put some check transfers, because checks are always a pain to paint, so we're going to use transfers instead. Now, these transfers, I believe, are some from Fantasy Flight Games. Oh no, these ones are from the Mighty Brush, sorry, excuse me. The Mighty Brush, these ones. But there is a good company called Fantasy Flight Games on eBay who also sell check transfers as well that you can get hold of. And if you do Dark Angels, I highly suggest you get kind of like loads of these. And you can see here what I'm doing with the gloss surface. I'm then, once that's dried, I'm then applying our check transfers over the area. Now you'll notice that it's not exactly cut to shape. Now I will cut that to shape once it's dried a little bit and once it's secured in place. And I'm using Micro Set and Micro Sol for this. However, I would highly recommend Ammo's kind of decal fixers. I found that is kind of works faster. It's just that I left it at my other studio, so I had to use the Micro Set and Micro Sol today. So as you can see, I'm just making tiny adjustments here, and then we'll blend the checks into the armor, make them look a little bit warm. They obviously look quite fresh and un-Ork-like at this very moment in time. And it's up to you how many checks you use, but I definitely find hand painting them, you know, it's like all things. You've got to do it neatly to be able to kind of like sell the effect. So I'm not willing to spend the time on that. So I use transfers is kind of the way I get around it. Now, those edges you can see once that's been dried using Micro Set and Micro Sol, I've just got a little bit of transfers kind of like overlapping on the sides here, and that's not what I want. I just want it on that flat panel. So I'm going around with demonic yellow, just kind of essentially just covering up the transfers where it's not on the surface that I want. And don't worry if it's not like an exact match. Like demonic yellow is actually quite a good match for the maize yellow that we just used, but we're going to use loads of the kind of like battle damage. So kind of if it's not an exact kind of match this paint, don't sweat it. And then next up, over that transfer, we're going to use the demonic yellow just with a little bit of a sponge, and then we're just going to put chips into those check transfers just to make it look like it's paint, you know, rather than a sticker that's been stuck on. It's been painted on by some, you know, Ork artisan, if they have such things, and then the paint has started to fleck away. And this is a good trick for like any transfer that you do, be it Space Marine, Tau, Orks. You know, it just makes it look a little bit realistic because it's the top layer of paint in these checks, so it's the first layer of paint that's going to kind of start wearing away. So once that has been done, I don't bother matte varnishing that. I'll matte varnish it kind of like a little bit later. But you know, you see a lot from Games Workshop, this kind of like awesome check fade that they do, and I was like, you know, how did they do that? And basically I was just like, I'll just get the airbrush out, and kind of with that demonic yellow just go over kind of one side of the checks on the shoulder pad. I did it on both sides, just to create that fade, so you can kind of see the checks underneath just fading, and that is for me a really easy way to create kind of like fades on the checks that Games Workshop do. You might not like it, whatever. Like I was really pleased actually with how the effect came out, because it took like 5 seconds with an airbrush and it was done. Speaking of airbrushes though, what I am doing now is just using some hardened leather to shade this yellow armor. Now, if you don't have an airbrush, you don't have to do this in the way that you don't have to shade those transfers. but I think it adds some warmth to the armor. And adds that shading to it and so therefore it makes it a little bit more dynamic. But as I say, you don't have to do this if you don't have an airbrush. The later stages will kind of add depth and shading anyway, so do not panic. Next up, we're going to be using Grim Black, and this is just used on the kind of obviously the black areas. However, there are some kind of motifs, you know, the Ork's, I guess, head on his wrist and then the teeth on his shoulder pad that I just did in a normal matte black rather than Grim Black. But the white areas, wherever there's black, I just applied this paint. I also use this for the kind of the tabard in between his legs. I use Grim Black for that as well. So yeah, pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated about this step. In fact, I don't think there's actually anything too complicated about any of the steps that we're going to do today. Next up, we're going to use Banshee Brown. You could use any dark brown for this. I just really like the colour Banshee Brown against yellow. I think it's good. And then just to give me a little bit of control, I've just applied the bit of sponge to a cotton wool bud and just used some masking tape to kind of put it in place. The reason why I've been a bit more careful and less slapdash than I perhaps usually am with a sponge is because I don't want to get any of this brown on the skin. Because when I use a speed paint on the skin a little bit later, it just means that you won't have bits of brown showing through that speed paint, right? And then next up, we are going to apply some Banshee Brown with a brush here, just to add to the areas that I couldn't get into with a sponge, but also just to add kind of more chips and more edges. And the way I would describe this is a negative edge highlight. Right, and as a result, you can be quite rough with this. We're not doing any edge highlighting, but what's great about light colored armor is that you don't necessarily need to do edge highlighting. You can kind of do this process by being very, very rough, and it will look great, and it will add the definition that you're probably looking for that an edge highlight often adds. You could, if you wanted to, go around with something like ice yellow and sponge that on, and then go in and then sponge in the Banshee Brown. I chose not to for this one. Wanted as few steps as possible for you guys. Right, next up, for the brown elements, which I think for this was some of the leather elements on the I want to say Gretchen, but again, correct me if I'm wrong down below. And then the leather straps on the big axe. I use Satchel Brown, and then I use Brownish Decay on the trousers. This is a really nice paint. I've used it more and more recently. I've used it as like an alternative to like a sepia ink for like gun barrels and stuff, and I'm getting on with it really well, and this works really well. I actually think for like Cadian Imperial Guard, Talon kind of like fatigues, this is a really nice paint. So I'll definitely come back to this in the future. Next up, we're going to apply gunmetal all over the metallic elements. Now, if you don't have gunmetal, you can use heavy metal, which I often use in tutorials, but any dark metal will do. Like, I don't think you need to get hung up too much on kind of what exact metal or silver I'm using. We're going to put an oil wash all over this later. Like, just a dark metal will be fine. Just don't sweat the small stuff like this. It's just whatever you got hold of is fine. It's all much of a muchness by the end. Once you put oils on it and dry brushed it or whatever. Evil Chrome I used on the exhausts, and then I used it also on the barrel of the gun, which the Gretchen is holding. And again, you could just keep the silver if you wanted to, but this is just to add a little bit of variation within those metallics. Like, sometimes variation is just really valuable. Moonlight Coral was used for the inside of the mouth and the gums, but this is highly thinned, highly diluted with some speed paint medium. So maybe like 2 drops of speed paint medium to 1 part Moonlight Coral, and then that will give you just the inside of your mouth done really nicely. And then I don't think I did anything further from there with those. And you'll notice I've left the head off and the jaw, which is also painted in. I painted in yellow, which you'll see in a second. It's just easier to access the inside of the model if you do it kind of this way, I think. So I would highly recommend leaving the head off in the way that I've done here. I know it's tempting to just build the model straight off, but yeah, sometimes it's just think about kind of yeah, just think carefully about sub-assemblies and how best they're going to serve you. So next up, we're going to use Camo Cloak. Now, Army Painter do a colour called Ork Skin, and Ork Skin is great for orcs, however, it's quite yellowish in tone, as in there's a lot of yellow within that Ork Skin speed paint. And we've obviously got yellow armour, so we want a point of contrast. We don't want something that's really yellow and similar in tone. So I've gone for something a bit darker and a bit greener. So I've gone for Camo Cloak here, and yeah, sure, it's maybe got some, a little bit of yellow in, but not too much. And that's really important for a point of contrast, I think. So when you're picking your tones for your orcs, and if you've got a heavily yellow armored orc, think about maybe using some darker green rather than using something that's really like a vibrant green, would be my advice. But again, it's personal preference. Like it's totally personal. That whatever color orc skin you want to do, you stick to that, right? But I've just decided to go for Camo Cloak because I think it's appropriate for the model that we're doing here. So again, really simple, and just using one layer on the face, on the Gretchen, on the skin. Right, next up, we're going to use some oil accelerator, a couple of drops of white spirit, and then some burnt umber oils. And then basically, I'm just going to use this as a semi all over pin wash. Like by the time I was adding it on, I was like, basically I've just might as well just dipped it in the oil wash here. But there is kind of like method in my madness, I guess. I'm being relatively careful with it. There's just so many nooks and crannies here that eventually I was just like, I'll just basically slop this on. This is fine to go over the skin, but I wouldn't recommend putting it on inside the mouth. Is the only thing I would say for this. And you can see it's just going into all the recesses. You will also notice that the model is very shiny at this moment in time, and that's because I've used a gloss varnish on it. You could do that through the airbrush, but actually I've decided to use Halford's Clear Lacquer, which is, believe it or not, a car gloss varnish. It's self-leveling, it's durable, it dries very, very quickly, dries about 15 minutes, and then it's good to go. Often, you use gloss varnishes through the airbrush, and it will say it takes 24 hours to cure. Who has got time for that? Certainly not me when I'm making YouTube videos. So I like to use a car lacquer, believe it or not. Now, the more lacquering you do with it, the less and less details they're going to be, because you've got lots of layers. But one or two is absolutely fine. Just be careful with it. And Rust-Oleum is a good option if you don't live in the UK and you live abroad. So this is our model, and then you can see with the Q-tip, I'm just going round, and I'll just kind of collect any excess off the flats of the armor panels, and then that means that all the oils are now seeped into all the recesses, and it's just making it look kind of grim and dark. And I mean, a grim dark artist might be outraged by a yellow orc, but you know what I mean, kind of like it feels like he's in an environment now. And then I've matte varnished this with Army Painter's matte varnish through the airbrush, and then this is good to go for all the next steps. So we dry brush those metallic areas with mithril, and then you can catch some of the armor, which is fine. And you can see here I'm just catching a few bits of the armor, and these are, I guess, like fresher scratches. So those brown ones are the ones that have started to rust, and then these silver scratches, there's less of them, but they're just kind of like newer scratches basically, that have happened like literally just now in the heat of battle. And you can add that if you want to, or you don't have to. Like, again, it's personal preference. It's just an option. You can see from the photos that we've had right at the beginning, what it looks like. If you just want to keep it brown, then do that. But at the moment, I was pretty pleased with the way it was going. And also, at the time, I just added some texture paint and some rocks, and just kind of like was leaving that to dry while I cracked on with the rest of the model. Right, these exhausts and the gun barrels. So basically, I've taken red tone here. I've not thinned it, and I'm just applying it towards the end of the barrel. Now, this is built up in multiple coats. So what I do is I put the first layer down, work on some stuff, and then come back. All in total, I probably put about 3 red layers, or 3 red tone layers down, and then each time I get, I try and draw that paint towards the end of the barrel, towards the top half. So the bottom part of it Has the, you can see the evil chrome still, and then the top part you can start to see the red tones within that. And I thought it actually came out pretty cool. Like, I was pleased with how it came out. But once all those reds have dried, those multiple layers of reds, you can then add purple tone towards the very end of the barrel. And again, this takes about 3 layers, and you can see I'm being a bit more careful. I'm just adding it towards the end. You could do this with an airbrush. That's absolutely fine. I have tried to minimize the amount of airbrushing I've done in this video, just because I'm really conscious that like lots of people who watch this don't have an airbrush. But yeah, you could totally do this with an airbrush, and it would take no time at all. Once that's dried, I then just dry brush the edges with the mithril silver again, just to pick them out and just to add a little bit of definition to them, which I think is probably worth doing. Right, next up, on the leather element, so I've used Paratrooper Tan. I've also used Paratrooper Tan on the brownish decay as well. So just use the same highlight. Like, you don't, the people are not looking at the trousers of this model. They are looking at like the skin and the yellow of the armor. So don't kind of like sweat it too much. But you can just add a few highlights here and edge highlights here and there if you want to. Again, it's not necessary. The speed paint kind of like highlights those edges for you. This is just something you can do if you want. Paratrooper Tan is quite versatile, I find, and to lighten it up. There are other lighter kind of browns, but you could also just add, if you want to, a little bit of like ice yellow into this mix, and I think that's quite like a nice highlight colour as well. Right, the Ork skin, which I'm sure some of you are curious about. So we've had our speed paint over it, and that started to highlight everything for us, right? That's the way these speed paints work. Then I'm going to move on to olive drab now. Straight up olive drab, just thin with a little bit of wall paint stabilizer. You can use water. I find more success with wall paint stabilizer. Where you can see the highlights, where the speed paint has gone into the recesses, it's slightly darker. But where it's obviously slightly lighter, that's where I'm focusing my olive drab now. Now I find Ork skin is much more forgiving than doing human flesh. Like, it's so much more forgiving because it's like really craggy. So if you are interested in doing Orks, I actually think the skin is the easiest part. There's quite a lot of forgiveness involved in it. But what's great about using a speed paint first on this is just basically it highlights where you've got to put your highlights, right? You just need to find an appropriate color that matches that camo cloak color that we were using, and olive drab I think is an appropriate kind of color here. So you just go around, add this on, do a few of the muscles, a few highlights here and there, top of the ears. The face in particular needs a lot of work because that's the focal point of the model, right? Like, you can not really worry about the arms too much, but the face is, and the Gretchen, the snotling, whatever it's called, needs more attention because that is the focus. At this point, I've mixed in some ice yellow into the olive drab to give me a highlight. This is probably about 2 parts olive drab to 1 part ice yellow. If you feel you need to go brighter, then do that. And you can see here I'm just doing what I describe as specular highlights. There's tippity top highlights where the light is reflecting off of the skin. And you could go further with just ice yellow if you wanted, but again, this is meant to just be a relatively straightforward and quick tutorial for you guys today. You don't, I don't think, need to do any more than this kind of like final highlight. And again, these are just like the tippity top bits. And then that's the Ork skin done. The eyes are just painted red. I used, I think, fiery vermilion. But again, I cannot express to you enough. Just use whatever red you've got in your arsenal, right? Like, what's also great about Orks is that, you just paint the eyes red and they're done. They're not like human eyes where you have to like paint the white and then the black on the inside of the white. They're Ork skin. All the features of them are so much more forgiving than painting like human skin, I find. You might disagree with me. That's okay. But hopefully that's a relatively quick and easy way for you guys to do your Ork skin. And I've decided not on this section to kind of speed up the video because I thought you guys would probably want to see as much of this section as possible. I don't know as well if you get many orcs in just all yellow, but I just think the yellow and green combo is just, it's a really sexy combo to me. Right, next up we are going to be doing just some kind of like the teeth and stuff like that. So basically you can just base coat that in Paratrooper Brown, and then you can use Bony Spikes just to highlight. Again, any kind of like neutral kind of ivory colour will be fine for this. People aren't massively going to be looking at the toenails of your Snotlings or Gretchens or whatever. You might want to spend a bit more time on this, but yeah, for me the focus was the skin and the armor, not necessarily like the teeth, but again, I'll leave it up to you. And you might want to make them like the toenails and fingers like black and the teeth white. Again, totally up to you. Like, it's not a, whatever works for you guys. And then just on these exhaust parts, I actually did paint them with a satin varnish at the end, just to kind of, yeah, I just felt it was appropriate because I had different kinds of like matte varnishes, and then they were slightly satin with the with those kind of like those tones. So just making those satin varnish, I think worked really well. And this is it. This is the finished model. I added some liquid pigments to the base. I think it was Vietnam Earth or something like that to the base for this. And then this is the finished model. I was actually really pleased with it. It probably took me, I don't know, 2 hours to do in total. It was pretty quick, and I thought the outcome like looked great. I was really pleased with it, particularly the checks, because I was like, that's a really quick and easy way to do checks on like mechanized orcs. So yeah, so I can highly recommend doing it that way, and hopefully it uses a good combination of like airbrushing and kind of just speed painting, and hopefully if you don't have an airbrush you can get something from this tutorial as well. So just a couple of big thank yous from me. First of all, big thank you to all my patrons who support me. Like, I really appreciate it. Like, it's a bit of a milestone for me this month, because it's just been over a year since I've been doing the Patreon, so it's absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. A big thank you to Crusader Games for sending me the models and that I paint on the channel, and a big thank you to the Army Painter as well for supporting my videos with paints and all the other kind of support they give me. And finally, a big thank you to you guys as well for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. You know, if you like the video, just leave a comment down below. It just helps to promote the video, you know, fuels the algorithm. And if you aren't subscribed already, make sure you do, because I do 2 tutorials a month, and I do even more over on Patreon, so it'd be lovely to kind of have you guys on board for my painting journeys. Anyway, see you guys on the next one.